Welcome to AI English TOEIC Listening Practice. Today we will practice 50 questions at the TOEIC 900 level. Question 1.
Which financial strategy would most effectively optimize capital structure while maintaining strategic flexibility in a volatile interest rate environment?
Here are your options. A dynamic liability management approach combining contingent capital instruments, strategic debt laddering, and optionality preserving covenant structures calibrated to core business cash flow characteristics. B. Our debt-to-equity ratio improved by 15% in the previous fiscal year. C. Interest rate volatility creates significant challenges for long-term capital planning. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 2.
What marketing approach would most effectively differentiate a premium offering in an increasingly commoditized market segment?
Here are your options. A. Premium positioning presents significant challenges in price-sensitive markets. B. Our brand awareness increased by 23% following the latest marketing campaign. C. Implementing experiential value architecture emphasizing non-replicable service elements, narrative-driven emotional connections, and exclusive community membership benefits supported by sophisticated price-value demonstration frameworks. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 3.
Which supply chain restructuring approach would most effectively balance resilience and cost efficiency in a geopolitically fragmented global environment?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a modular network design with strategic redundancy nodes, geopolitical diversification protocols, and dynamic reconfiguration capabilities enabled by digital twin simulation modeling and advanced risk monitoring systems. B. Global supply chain disruptions have increased by 47% over the past 5 years. C. Our company maintains relationships with suppliers in 32 countries across 6 continents. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 4.
What talent acquisition framework would most effectively address chronic skills shortages in highly specialized technical domains?
Here are your options. A. Technical talent shortages represent a significant challenge across multiple industries. B. Developing an ecosystem-based talent cultivation approach combining non-traditional credential recognition, skill-based assessment methodologies, strategic capability development partnerships, and targeted education ecosystem investments focused on long-term pipeline development. C. Our recruitment team processed over 5,000 applications for technical positions last year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 5.
Which regulatory compliance approach would most effectively navigate the complexities of overlapping jurisdictional requirements in global data privacy governance?
Here are your options. A. Our privacy team monitors regulatory developments in 27 key markets. B. Data privacy regulations have proliferated globally with increasing stringency. C. Implementing a superset compliance architecture with modular jurisdictional adaptability, dynamic regulatory intelligence systems, and automated impact assessment protocols that enable efficient adaptation to evolving requirements while maintaining cross-border data transfer capabilities. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 6.
What negotiation methodology would most effectively resolve multi-party stakeholder conflicts in complex infrastructure development projects?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a structured value creation approach combining interest-based problem decomposition, phased consensus building protocols, collaborative option generation techniques, and contingent agreement frameworks that accommodate diverse stakeholder constraints. B. Infrastructure projects frequently encounter stakeholder resistance during development phases. C. Our project involved coordination among 14 different public and private stakeholder groups. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 7.
Which pricing strategy would most effectively maximize lifetime value in subscription-based service models with high acquisition costs?
Here are your options. A. Customer acquisition costs have increased by 35% in our industry over the past 3 years. B. Implementing a dynamic value capture approach combining behavioral segmentation, experience-based tier structuring, strategic onboarding discounting, and expansion-focused pricing architecture that optimizes for expansion revenue rather than initial conversion. C. Our subscription service offers 3 different pricing tiers for various customer segments. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 8.
What methodological approach would most effectively evaluate operational efficiency improvements in complex manufacturing environments?
Here are your options. A. Our manufacturing division implemented 6 significant process improvements last quarter. B. A systems-based measurement framework combining constraint-focused throughput analysis, process variability reduction metrics, cross-functional cycle time decomposition, and value stream efficiency mapping integrated with quality outcome indicators. C. Operational efficiency measurement presents significant challenges in complex manufacturing systems. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 9.
Which risk management framework would most effectively address the growing complexity of cyber threats in interconnected digital ecosystems?
Here are your options. A. Implementing an adaptive resilience model that integrates threat intelligence networks, behavioral anomaly detection systems, consequence-based mitigation prioritization, and rapid response capabilities within a continuous assessment framework. B. Cyber threats have increased in sophistication and frequency across all industry sectors. C. Our cybersecurity team conducted 12 penetration tests and vulnerability assessments last year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 10.
What strategic approach to international market entry would most effectively balance opportunity capture with risk mitigation in emerging economies?
Here are your options. A. Emerging markets present both significant opportunities and substantial risks for multinational corporations. B. Developing a staged commitment architecture combining local ecosystem partnerships, capability-based expansion sequencing, distributed operational models, and modular investment structures that enable rapid scaling while limiting downside exposure. C. Our company has established operations in 7 different emerging market countries. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 11.
Which approach to executive compensation design would most effectively align management incentives with long-term shareholder value creation?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a multidimensional incentive architecture combining strategic milestone achievement metrics, relative performance indexing, time-differentiated equity vehicles, and clawback mechanisms that address both operational excellence and strategic positioning outcomes. B. Executive compensation practices have evolved significantly in response to shareholder activism. C. Our compensation committee reviews executive pay packages annually with support from external consultants. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 12.
What strategic approach to digital transformation would most effectively address legacy system constraints in traditional financial institutions?
Here are your options. A. Digital transformation initiatives face significant technical debt challenges in established organizations. B. Our technology modernization program has a 5-year implementation timeline with quarterly milestones. C. Implementing a composable architecture strategy combining API-enabled decoupling, data fabric integration, progressive system deprecation, and capability-focused microservices migration that enables continuous innovation while maintaining operational stability. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 13.
Which approach to brand revitalization would most effectively reconnect legacy brands with younger consumer segments without alienating their core customer base?
Here are your options. A. Developing a stratified relevance strategy combining heritage-anchored value identification, cross-generational community building, selective attribute modernization, and digital engagement architecture differentiated by audience segment while maintaining core brand equity elements. B. Our legacy brand has operated in the market for over 75 years with strong recognition. C. Brand relevance among younger consumers presents significant challenges for established companies. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 14.
What methodological approach would most effectively evaluate the economic impact of sustainability initiatives beyond conventional ROI metrics?
Here are your options. A. Sustainability initiatives require sophisticated impact measurement approaches. B. A comprehensive valuation framework combining monetized risk avoidance assessment, opportunity cost scenario modeling, externality internalization methodologies, and multi-capital impact quantification that captures both tangible and intangible value creation dimensions. C. Our organization has implemented 14 major sustainability initiatives across global operations. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 15.
Which human capital development approach would most effectively build essential future capabilities while maintaining current operational excellence?
Here are your options. A. Our training and development function delivered over 25,000 hours of instruction last year. B. Future workforce capabilities represent a strategic priority for forward-thinking organizations. C. Implementing a dynamic capability acceleration system combining targeted skill-adjacent development, experiential learning integration, cross-functional capability mobility, and strategic workforce architecture aligned with technology evolution trajectories. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 16.
What strategic approach to healthcare delivery transformation would most effectively improve patient outcomes while controlling escalating system costs?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a value-based delivery architecture combining predictive intervention models, care pathway optimization, outcome-aligned provider incentives, and technology-enabled continuous monitoring systems that prioritize prevention and early intervention. B. Healthcare costs have increased at twice the rate of general inflation over the past decade. C. Our hospital system implemented electronic medical records across all facilities last year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 17.
Which portfolio management approach would most effectively optimize resource allocation across diverse R&D initiatives with varying risk-return profiles?
Here are your options. A. Innovation portfolio management presents significant challenges in resource-constrained environments. B. Implementing a dynamic options-based allocation framework combining strategic bucketing methodologies, aggregate risk balancing, real options valuation techniques, and adaptive resource reallocation mechanisms triggered by predefined performance milestones. C. Our R&D department manages approximately 45 active projects with varying time horizons. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 18.
What systematic approach would most effectively address unconscious bias in talent assessment and promotion decisions?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a multifaceted debiasing protocol combining structured decision criteria, blind evaluation processes, diverse assessment panels, calibration review mechanisms, and data-driven pattern detection tools that identify and remediate systemic distortions. B. Unconscious bias influences numerous organizational decision processes despite good intentions. C. Our Diversity and Inclusion Department provided unconscious bias training to 85% of managers last year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 19.
Which strategic approach to intellectual property management would most effectively maximize value creation in open innovation ecosystems?
Here are your options. A. Our organization holds over 850 active patents across multiple technology domains. B. Intellectual property strategy significantly impacts innovation ecosystem participation. C. Implementing a selective rights architecture combining strategic protection zones, collaborative licensing frameworks, directed commons creation, and value capture mechanisms that optimize for ecosystem productivity while preserving competitive differentiation potential. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 20.
What methodological approach would most effectively evaluate merger and acquisition candidates beyond traditional financial valuation metrics?
Here are your options. A. A comprehensive integration assessment framework combining strategic capability complementarity analysis, cultural compatibility diagnostic, innovation portfolio evaluation, talent retention risk quantification, and synergy realization probability modeling. C. Our corporate development team evaluates approximately 35 potential acquisition targets annually. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 21.
Which strategic approach to educational technology implementation would most effectively enhance learning outcomes while addressing equity concerns?
Here are your options. A. Educational technology investments have increased significantly across institutional budgets. B. Our school district deployed tablet devices to 85% of students over the past 3 years. C. Implementing an integrated capability development framework combining universal access infrastructure, adaptive learning systems, educator capacity building, differentiated pedagogical models, and continuous impact assessment focused on closing achievement gaps. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 22.
What strategic approach to organizational change management would most effectively overcome embedded resistance in highly institutionalized environments?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a multi-level influence architecture combining legitimacy-building narratives, distributed change advocacy networks, strategic microtransformation sequencing, and institutional reconfiguration mechanisms that gradually shift power dynamics and normative structures. B. Organizational resistance presents significant challenges in transformational change initiatives. C. Our Change Management Office has supported 12 major transformation initiatives over the past 5 years. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 23.
Which architectural approach would most effectively enable legacy manufacturing organizations to leverage industrial Internet of Things (IIoT) capabilities?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a progressive transformation framework combining edge computing integration, data architecture modernization, secured operational technology bridges, and incremental capability deployment that delivers value while managing disruption risks. B. Industrial Internet of Things adoption has accelerated across manufacturing sectors. C. Our manufacturing division operates 12 facilities with varying levels of technological sophistication. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 24.
What strategic approach to retail channel integration would most effectively enhance customer experience while optimizing operational efficiency?
Here are your options. A. Our retail organization operates 285 physical locations and an e-commerce platform. B. Implementing a unified commerce architecture combining shared inventory visibility, identity-driven interaction design, cross-channel fulfillment optimization, and integrated data analytics that enable seamless customer journeys while maximizing resource utilization. C. Omnichannel retail strategies have become essential in the competitive marketplace. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 25.
Which governance framework would most effectively manage the ethical implications of AI deployment across enterprise operations?
Here are your options. A. Artificial intelligence implementation raises significant ethical considerations for organizations. B. Implementing a comprehensive oversight system combining ethical design principles, algorithmic impact assessment protocols, transparent documentation requirements, cross-functional review processes, and stakeholder accountability mechanisms calibrated to risk exposure levels. C. Our organization has deployed AI solutions across 7 different business functions. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 26.
Which approach to enterprise data strategy would most effectively transform raw information assets into sustainable competitive advantage?
Here are your options. A. Our data warehouse contains over 15 petabytes of operational and customer information. B. Implementing an integrated value orchestration framework combining data fabric architecture, contextualized analytics capabilities, decision process integration, and insight democratization mechanisms that align analytical capabilities with strategic differentiation opportunities. C. Data-driven decision-making has become increasingly important in competitive markets. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 27.
What methodological approach would most effectively evaluate the real long-term economic impact of corporate social responsibility initiatives?
Here are your options. A. Developing a multi-capital assessment framework combining longitudinal stakeholder value tracking, counterfactual risk modeling, reputation economics quantification, and operational resilience correlation analysis that captures both direct and systemic value creation pathways. B. Corporate social responsibility reporting has become a standard practice among large enterprises. C. Our organization invests approximately 2% of annual profits in various social impact initiatives. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 28.
Which strategic approach to hospitality service design would most effectively differentiate premium offerings in increasingly commoditized market segments?
Here are your options. A. Premium hospitality segments face increasing competition from alternative service providers. B. Our hospitality brand operates 78 properties across 3 distinct service tiers. C. Implementing an experiential architecture combining anticipatory personalization systems, cultural authenticity integration, transformational moment design, and emotional signature development that creates distinctive memory formation beyond functional service delivery. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 29.
What strategic framework would most effectively guide pharmaceutical R&D portfolio decisions to balance breakthrough innovation with predictable revenue generation?
Here are your options. A. Implementing an ambidextrous investment architecture combining therapeutic platform leverage, translational science acceleration, strategic licensing integration, and staged funding mechanisms calibrated to clinical development risk profiles. B. Pharmaceutical R&D investments typically require 10 to 15 years from discovery to commercialization. C. Our research pipeline includes 23 compounds at various stages of clinical development. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 30.
Which approach to cybersecurity governance would most effectively address the human factors that frequently undermine technical security controls?
Here are your options. A. Security breaches frequently result from human errors despite robust technical protections. B. Implementing a behavioral security framework combining contextual risk awareness training, frictionless security design principles, embedded decision support mechanisms, and continuous behavioral analytics that address underlying psychological patterns rather than just policy compliance. C. Our organization conducts quarterly security awareness training for all employees. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 31.
What strategic approach to agricultural technology deployment would most effectively balance productivity improvements with environmental sustainability in developing regions?
Here are your options. A. Our agricultural development program operates in 14 countries across 3 continents. B. Implementing an integrated development framework combining context-appropriate technology solutions, regenerative agriculture principles, local capability building, sustainable intensification methodologies, and inclusive value chain connections that enhance resilience while improving yields. C. Agricultural productivity growth is essential for food security in developing economies. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 32.
Which approach to legal department transformation would most effectively balance cost control imperatives with expanding enterprise risk management requirements?
Here are your options. A. Implementing a strategic service delivery model combining tiered resource allocation frameworks, technology-enabled workflow optimization, proactive risk advisory integration, and managed outsourcing partnerships calibrated to matter complexity and strategic importance. B. Corporate legal departments face increasing pressure to contain costs while expanding capabilities. C. Our legal department handles approximately 650 matters annually across various practice areas. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 33.
What methodological framework would most effectively translate consumer neuroscience insights into actionable marketing strategy development?
Here are your options. A. Consumer neuroscience research has expanded significantly over the past decade. B. Developing an applied translation model combining implicit response mapping, multimodal engagement architecture, non-conscious motivation alignment, and contextual trigger identification that bridges theoretical neural insights with practical marketing applications. C. Our neuromarketing studies utilize advanced eye tracking and biometric measurement technologies. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 34.
Which strategic approach to enterprise architecture would most effectively enable digital business transformation while managing technical debt accumulation?
Here are your options. A. Technical debt often accumulates during rapid digital transformation initiatives. B. Our IT modernization program encompasses 35 critical business applications. C. Implementing an evolutionary architecture model combining capability-based planning, composable system design, continuous technical health monitoring, and strategic refactoring allocation that balances innovation velocity with architectural sustainability. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 35.
What philanthropic strategy would most effectively maximize social impact while ensuring sustainable institutional funding?
Here are your options. A. implementing an integrated impact approach combining catalytic funding mechanisms, systems change methodology, cross-sector partnership development, and sustainable revenue diversification that addresses root causes while building long-term financial resilience. B. Our foundation distributed grants totaling $45 million to 120 organizations last year. C. Philanthropic institutions face increasing pressure to demonstrate measurable social outcomes. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 36.
Which strategic approach to workforce planning would most effectively address structural talent shortages in critical infrastructure sectors?
Here are your options. A. Critical infrastructure sectors face persistent challenges in attracting and retaining skilled talent. B. Implementing a comprehensive talent ecosystem strategy combining early pipeline development, non-traditional talent pathway creation, skill adjacency mapping, and public-private capability building partnerships that address systemic supply constraints. C. Our organization's workforce includes 15,000 employees across various technical specialties. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 37.
What methodological approach would most effectively measure the business impact of diversity and inclusion initiatives beyond representation metrics?
Here are your options. A. Developing a multi-level impact framework combining organizational climate analysis, cognitive diversity contribution quantification, innovation process inclusion mapping, and market responsiveness correlation that connects inclusion dynamics to business outcomes. B. Our diversity initiatives have increased representation of underrepresented groups by 18% over 3 years. C. Organizations increasingly recognize diversity as a strategic business advantage. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 38.
Which customer experience strategy would most effectively enhance loyalty in subscription-based digital service models?
Here are your options. A. Customer retention metrics significantly impact subscription business valuation multiples. B. Implementing a proactive value nurturing approach combining usage pattern personalization, success outcome facilitation, embedded community development, and continuous relevance evolution that transforms functional utilization into habitual engagement. C. Our digital subscription service maintains a 78% annual renewal rate across customer segments. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 39.
What strategic approach to research commercialization would most effectively bridge the gap between academic discovery and market application?
Here are your options. A. Implementing an integrated translation ecosystem combining staged development pathways, interdisciplinary collaboration structures, industry-academic partnership models, and market-informed research prioritization that accelerates commercialization velocity. B. Our technology transfer office managed 85 patent applications and 12 licensing agreements last year. C. Research commercialization often encounters significant obstacles in transitioning from laboratory to marketplace. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 40.
Which strategic approach to circular economy implementation would most effectively transform linear production models in manufacturing sectors?
Here are your options. A. Our sustainability initiative has reduced waste to landfill by 35% over the past 5 years. B. Implementing a systemic transformation framework combining regenerative design principles, supply chain circularity integration, product as service business models, and distributed material recovery infrastructure that fundamentally reconfigures value creation logic. C. Circular economy approaches have gained increasing attention among manufacturing organizations. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 41.
What methodological approach would most effectively leverage big data analytics to optimize complex logistics networks?
Here are your options. A. Big data applications have transformed numerous aspects of supply chain management. B. Developing an integrated optimization architecture combining real-time network modeling, predictive constraint identification, multi-echelon inventory optimization, and dynamic routing algorithms that leverage both structured and unstructured data sources for continuous network reconfiguration. C. Our logistics operation manages the movement of approximately 25,000 shipments daily. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 42.
Which strategic approach to corporate venturing would most effectively identify and commercialize disruptive opportunities outside the core business?
Here are your options. A. Implementing an ambidextrous venture architecture combining strategic option portfolio development, autonomous innovation governance, accelerated validation methodologies, and graduated integration mechanisms that balance entrepreneurial exploration with corporate resources. B. Our corporate venture fund invested in 12 early-stage companies over the past 3 years. C. Corporate venture activities have increased significantly as organizations seek new growth avenues. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 43.
What methodological approach would most effectively measure the intangible value creation of knowledge workers beyond traditional productivity metrics?
Here are your options. A. Knowledge worker productivity assessment presents significant challenges for organizations. B. Our performance evaluation system integrates both quantitative and qualitative assessment components. C. Developing a multidimensional value framework combining problem complexity indexing, solution quality assessment, knowledge network contribution analysis, and innovation influence tracing that captures both immediate outputs and systemic impacts. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 44.
Which strategic approach to urban mobility innovation would most effectively balance technological transformation with social equity considerations?
Here are your options. A. Implementing an inclusive mobility framework combining multimodal integration architecture, needs-based service design, participatory planning processes, and differential pricing mechanisms that ensure technology advancements benefit diverse community segments. B. Transportation technologies are evolving rapidly with significant urban infrastructure implications. C. Our city's transportation system serves approximately 2 million passenger trips daily. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 45.
What strategic framework would most effectively guide bank digital transformation while addressing regulatory compliance requirements?
Here are your options. A. Financial regulations have become increasingly complex in the digital banking environment. B. Implementing a compliance-integrated architecture combining modular platform development, regulatory technology enablement, automated governance mechanisms, and privacy by design principles that embed compliance capabilities within digital transformation initiatives. C. Our bank serves 5 million customers through both digital and physical channels. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 46.
Which performance measurement framework would most effectively evaluate public sector innovation initiatives beyond traditional efficiency metrics?
Here are your options. A. Developing a multidimensional public value framework combining service experience enhancement, outcome effectiveness measurement, capability building assessment, and socioeconomic impact quantification that captures both tangible and systemic reform benefits. B. Our government agency implemented 14 innovation initiatives across various service areas. C. Public sector innovation evaluation presents unique challenges compared to private industry. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 47.
What methodological approach would most effectively integrate behavioral economics insights into strategic pricing decisions?
Here are your options. A. Behavioral economics has significantly influenced understanding of consumer decision-making. B. Our pricing strategy incorporates multiple variables including competitor positioning. C. Implementing a cognitive decision architecture combining value perception framing, choice architecture optimization, psychological reference point calibration, and consumption friction mitigation that aligns pricing structures with natural decision heuristics. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 48.
Which strategic approach to digital health implementation would most effectively balance technology innovation with clinical workflow integration?
Here are your options. A. Digital health technologies have proliferated significantly over the past decade. B. Implementing a clinician-centered design methodology combining workflow ethnography, incremental functionality deployment, collaborative adaptation processes, and value documentation frameworks that prioritize clinical utility over technical sophistication. C. Our healthcare system implemented electronic health records across 12 facilities last year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is B. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 49.
What methodological approach would most effectively quantify cybersecurity investment returns beyond traditional risk reduction metrics?
Here are your options. A. Developing a comprehensive value framework combining operational resilience evaluation, digital trust economics, strategic optionality valuation, and brand protection quantification that captures both defensive and enabling investment outcomes. B. Cybersecurity investment decisions often compete with other strategic priorities for resources. C. Our organization allocated $12 million to cybersecurity initiatives in the current fiscal year. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is A. Let me explain why. Let's move on to the next question. Question 50.
Which strategic approach to corporate sustainability would most effectively integrate environmental considerations into core business strategy beyond compliance requirements?
Here are your options. A. Our sustainability program has reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 28% since baseline. B. Environmental considerations increasingly influence stakeholder expectations and market dynamics. C. Implementing a strategic integration model combining materiality-based prioritization, value chain sustainability embedding, innovation-focused environmental approaches, and regenerative business model transformation that creates competitive advantage through environmental leadership. You have 3 seconds to think about your answer. The correct answer is C. Let me explain why. Thank you for practicing with AI English TOEIC listening. Keep practicing to improve your English skills.